Welcome to Pastor Andrew's Inspirations. Today we will talk about the biblical village of Capernaum. Capernaum was a fishing village established during the time of the Hasmoneans, located on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It had a population of about 1,500 people. Archaeological excavations have revealed two ancient synagogues built one over the other. A house turned into a church by the Byzantines is believed to have been the home of St. Peter. The village was inhabited endlessly from the 2nd century BC to the 11th century AD, when it was deserted sometime before the Crusader conquest. This includes the re-establishment of the village during the early Islamic period, soon after the 749 earthquake. The village then became known as Al-Samakia. It was cleared of its Palestinian population during the 1947 to 1948 Civil War in Mandatory Palestine on May the 4th, 1948, under Operation Matat. Capernaum, the original name of the town, means village of comfort in Hebrew, and apparently there is no connection with the prophet named Nahum. The word Capernaum in modern English means a place with a messy accumulation of objects and comes from the town's name. The town is cited in all four Gospels. In Matthew chapter 4 verse 13, chapter 8 verse 5, chapter 11 verse 23, and chapter 17 verse 24. In the book of Mark chapter 1 verse 21, chapter 2 verse 1, and chapter 9 verse 33. In the book of Luke chapter 4 verse 23 and 31, chapter 7 verse 1, and chapter 10 verse 15. And in the book of John chapter 4 verse 12, chapter 4 verse 46, and chapter 6 verses 17, 24, and 59, where it was reported to have been the hometown of the tax collector Matthew, and located not far from Bethsaida, the hometown of the apostles Simon, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. Some readers take Mark chapter 2 verse 1 as proof that Jesus may have owned a home in the town, but it is more likely that he stayed in the house of one of his followers here. He definitely spent time teaching and healing there. One Sabbath, Jesus taught in the synagogue in Capernaum and healed a man who was possessed by an unclean spirit. In Luke chapter 4 verses 31 to 36 and Mark chapter 1 verses 21 to 28. This story is notable as the only one that is shared in the Gospels of Mark and Luke, but not contained in the Gospel of Matthew. Afterward, Jesus healed Simon Peter's mother-in-law of a fever in Luke chapter 4 verses 38 and 39, in Luke chapter 7 verses 1 to 10, and Matthew chapter 8 verse 5. This is the place where Jesus healed the servant of a Roman centurion who had asked for his help. Capernaum is also the location of the healing of the paralytic, lowered by friends through the roof to reach Jesus. As reported in Mark chapter 2 verses 1 to 12 and Luke chapter 5 verses 17 to 26. In Matthew chapter 9 verse 1, the town is referred to only as his own city. And the account in Matthew chapter 9 verses 2 to 7 does not mention the paralytic being lowered through the roof. Most traditional biblical commentators assume that in Matthew chapter 9 verses 1 to 7, his own city means Capernaum, because of the details that are common to the three synoptic gospels. According to the synoptic gospels, Jesus selected this town as the center of his public ministry in Galilee after he left the small mountainous hamlet of Nazareth. In Matthew chapter 4, verses 12 to 17, he also officially cursed Capernaum, along with Bethsaida and Chorazin, saying, "You will be thrown down to Hades," in Matthew chapter 11, verse 23, because of their lack of faith in him as the Messiah. Archaeological evidence proves that the town was established in the 2nd century BC during Hasmonean period, when a number of new fishing villages sprung up around the lake. The site had no defensive wall and stretched along the northwestern shore of the lake. The cemetery zone is found 656 feet north of the synagogue, which places it beyond the inhabited area of the town. The historic site of Capernaum is 1.5 miles from Tabgha, an area which appears to have been used for agricultural purposes, judging by the many oil and grain mills which were discovered in the excavation. Fishing was also a source of income. The remains of another harbor were found to the west of that built by the Franciscans. No sources have been found for the belief that Capernaum was involved in the bloody Jewish revolts against the Romans. The First Jewish-Roman War, or Bar Kokhba's revolt, although there is reason to believe that Josephus, one of the Jewish generals during the earlier revolt, was taken to Capernaum after a fall from his horse in nearby Bethesda, or Bethsaida as they call it. Josephus referred to Capernaum as a fertile spring. He stayed the night there after bruising his wrist in a riding accident. Capernaum was mentioned in the writings of Theodosius, the archdeacon, who said that it was situated as one goes northward from Tiberias, 2 miles from Tabgha, and 6 miles short of Bethsaida along the same route. In 1838, American explorer Edward Robinson discovered ruins, which he identified as those of a synagogue, but did not relate this to ancient Capernaum. In 1866, Charles William Wilson identified the location as Capernaum. In 1894, Franciscan friar Giuseppe Baldi of Naples, the custodian of the Holy Land, was able to purchase a good part of the land around the ruins. Additional land on the eastern portion of the site became the property of the Greek Orthodox Patriarch of Jerusalem. In 1905, Germans Heinrich Kohl and Karl Watzinger began a study of Galilean synagogues. These were continued by Franciscan fathers Wendelin von Benden and Gaudenzio Orfala. The excavations resulted in the discovery of 2 public buildings, the synagogue and an octagonal church. In 1968, excavation of the western portion of the site owned by the Franciscans, was resumed by Virgilio Corbo and Stanislaw Lofreda. During this phase, the major discovery was of a first-century house, which is believed by Christians to be the home of St. Peter. These excavations have been ongoing, with some publication on the internet as recently as 2003. The excavations revealed that the site was established at the beginning of the Hasmonean period, roughly in the 2nd century BC, and abandoned in the 11th century. The eastern half of the site, which is owned by the Orthodox Monastery of the Holy Apostles, centered on the red-roofed Church of the Holy Apostles, was surveyed and partially excavated under the direction of Basilios Zephyrus. This section has found the village from the Byzantine and early Arab periods. Features include a pool, apparently used for the processing of fish, and a hoard of gold coins in 1989. On both sides of an ample North Sea main street arose small districts, bordered by small cross-sectional streets, and no exit side streets. The walls were constructed with coarse basalt blocks, and reinforced with stone and mud. But the stones were not dressed, and mortar was not used, which may explain why some things have since fallen. The most extensive part of the typical house was the courtyard, where there was a circular furnace made of refractory earth, as well as grain mills, and a set of stone stairs that led to the roof. The floors of the houses were cobbled. Around the open courtyard, modest cells were arranged which received light through a series of openings or low windows. Given the coarse construction of the walls, there was rarely a second story to a typical home, and the roof would have been constructed of light wooden beams and thatched, mixed with mud. This, along with the discovery of the stairs to the roof, recalls the biblical story of the healing of the paralytic. And when they could not come nigh unto him for the press, they uncovered the roof where he was, and when they had broken it up, let down the bed wherein the sick of the palsy lay, in Mark chapter 2, verse 4. A study of the district located between the synagogue and the octagonal church showed several extended families clustered together, jointly using the same courtyards and doorless internal passages. The houses had no hygienic facilities or drainage. The rooms were narrow. Most objects found were made of clay: pots, plates, amphoras, and lamps, fish hooks, weights for fish nets, striker pins, weaving bobbins, and basalt mills for milling grain and pressing olives were also found. As of the 4th century, the houses were constructed with good quality mortar and fine ceramics. This was about the time that the synagogue now visible was built. Differences in social class were not noticeable. Buildings constructed at the founding of the town continued to be in use until the time of the abandonment of the town. According to Luke's Gospel, the Capernaum synagogue at the time of Jesus' ministry had been built or funded by a Roman centurion based there. The ruins of a later building among the oldest synagogues in the world were identified by Charles William Wilson. The large, ornately carved white building stones of the synagogue stood out significantly among the smaller, plain blocks of local black basalt used for the town's other buildings, almost all residential. The synagogue was built almost entirely of white blocks of calcareous stone brought from distant quarries. The synagogue appears to have been built around the 4th or 5th century. Beneath the foundation of this synagogue lies another foundation, made of basalt, and Lofreda suggests that this is the foundation of a synagogue from the 1st century. Maybe the one mentioned in the Gospels. Later excavation work was attempted underneath the synagogue floor, but while Lofreda claimed to have found a paved surface, others are of the opinion that this was an open, paved market area. The building consists of 4 parts: the praying hall, the western patio, the southern balustrade, and a small room at the northwest of the building. The praying hall measured 80 feet by 61 feet, with the southern face looking toward Jerusalem. The internal walls were covered with painted plaster and fine stucco work found during the excavations. Watzinger, like Orfali, believed that there had been an upper floor reserved for women, with access by means of an external staircase located in the small room. But this opinion was not substantiated by the later excavations of the site. The ancient synagogue has 2 inscriptions, one in Greek and the other in Aramaic, that commemorate the benefactors that helped in the construction of the building. There are also carvings of 5 and 6 pointed stars and of palm trees. In 1926, the Franciscan Father Gaudenzio Orfali began the restoration of the synagogue. The work was interrupted by his death in a car accident in 1926 and was continued by Virgilio Corbo beginning in 1976. The House of Prayer, one block of homes, called by the Franciscan excavators the Holy Insula, or a block of homes around a courtyard, was found to have a complex history. Located between the synagogue and the lakeshore, it was found near the front of a labyrinth of houses from many different periods. 3 principal layers have been identified. A group of private houses built around the 1st century BC, which remained in use until the early 4th century. The largest transformation of one of the homes in the 4th century, and the octagonal church in the middle of the 5th century. The excavators concluded that one house in the village was venerated as the house of Peter, the fisherman, as early as the mid-1st century, with 2 churches having been constructed over it. One house, slightly larger than most, consisted of a few small rooms clustered around 2 open courts, one to the north and the other the south. One large room in particular, near the east side and joining both courtyards, was especially large, 24 feet long and roughly square. An open space on the eastern side contained a brick oven. A threshold, which allowed crossing between the 2 courtyards, remains well preserved to this day. Beginning in the latter half of the 1st century AD, this house displayed markedly different characteristics than the other excavated houses. The rough walls of the main room were reworked with care and plastered. Furthermore, almost no domestic ceramics are recovered, but lamps and large storage jars abound. This suggests that the house was no longer used as a residence, but a communal gathering place. One explanation recommended for this treatment is that the room was respected as a religious gathering place, a domus ecclesia, or house church, for the Christian community. This idea has been evaluated by several scholars. Where excavators had claimed to find graffiti including the name of Peter, others have found very little, legible writing. Others have questioned whether the space is actually a room. The paved floor, the large space without supports, and the presence of a cooking space have prompted some to note that these are more consistent with yet another courtyard. In this period, the Sacra Insula acquired a new appearance. First, a thick-walled, slightly trapezoidal enclosure was built surrounding the entire insula. Its sides were 88 to 98 feet long. Made of plaster, they reached a height of 7 feet on the north side. It had two doors, one in the southwest corner and the other in the northeast corner. Although there is evidence that the private houses remained in use after the transformation, the one particular room that had before been treated differently was altered and expanded. A central archway was added to support a roof, and the north wall was bound with mortar. New pavement was installed, and the walls and floor were plastered. This structure remained until the middle of the 5th century, when the Sacra Insula was dismantled and replaced with a larger basilica. The 5th century church consists of a central octagon with 8 pillars, an exterior octagon with thresholds still in situ, and a gallery or portico that leads both into the interior of the church as well as into complex of associated buildings to the east. A linkage between via a short passageway. Later, this passage was blocked, and an asp with a pool for baptism was constructed in the middle of the east wall. From this wall ascended 2 stairs on either side of the baptistry, and the excess water from the right would have escaped along this path. The Byzantines, upon constructing the new church, placed the central octagon directly on top of the walls of St. Peter's house, with the aim of preserving its exact location, although none of the original house was visible any longer, as the walls had been torn down and the floor covered in mosaics. In the portico, the pattern of the mosaic was surely and purely geometric, with 4 rows of contiguous circles and small crosses. In the zone of the external octagon, the mosaics represented plants and animals in a style similar to that found in the Basilica of the Feeding of the 5,000 in Tabgha. In the central octagon, the mosaic was composed of a strip of calcified flowers, of a field of schools of fish with small flowers, and of a great circle with a peacock in the center. The memorial is a modern church built above the excavated remains of the ancient house and the Byzantine octagonal church, and dedicated in 1990. The dish-shaped structure stands on concrete stilts, ensuring visibility to the venerated ancient building. Additionally, a glass floor located at the center of the church allows direct view of the excavated remains below. This is the biblical village of Capernaum. Adonai Nisi, the Lord, is our banner. God's blessings be upon us all.